And thank you to Andrea and Leah for inviting me and Diana to this webinar. I hope that these receipts, which we have developed during 2 years of urban cultural planning activities, will be useful to you, although each time the approaches, they are very site-specific, so they depend upon the urban and social and cultural situation at the concrete site. I myself coming from 2 sectors. From one hand, it's urban games and research NGO, and from the other hand, it's university, Gediminas Technical University, the Faculty of Creative Industries. So our approach, this actually grounded, made a double base to my approach during this project. I will share the screen now. I hope that you see it, right? There, okay. So let's speak about this implementation phase in cultural planning, and I will focus on several subtopics during this presentation. From one hand, it's about exploring and co-designing the courtyards with local residents, how we bring them together and how we develop the ideas for the yards, how they can be revitalized. From the other hand, the very strong focus of the activities which have been developed through 2 years of urban cultural planning project are kids and youth, because we are a university and we work with young future professionals, but also in the neighborhoods, kids are one of the co-owners of public spaces, and we want to see them in a more active role in co-designing urban spaces. And we know that currently in European cities, we face this challenge of how to encourage kids to navigate their districts more actively, not to be, not to stay at homes, and to be more active in their explorations. So I think that urban cultural planning is a very good tool actually for encouraging kids and their parents also to explore and navigate areas more actively. And also it's about reinventing green spaces in the so-called green sleeping districts. And because I mentioned that cultural planning approach is always site-specific, I will provide you a short glimpse of the area itself and its specific traits. So we are speaking about one of the districts of Vilnius, which is called Šnipiškės, and which is interesting as a multi-layered historical area, which has its historical part coming from, still we can find the architecture of 19th century, the end of 19th century, the beginning of 20th century. And this area itself is a suburban area, a historical suburban area of the city of Vilnius. But in 60s and 80s, it was redeveloped, and by this socialist approach of development. So a lot of block of houses were built there, and they are quite typical to any areas of this kind in Vilnius. So we were thinking that if we start working with the territory of blocks of houses, flats, we will be able to develop some insights which could be useful and could be applied in different places in Vilnius and other Lithuanian cities, which have these territories which were developed in 50s and 80s, and we will have some kind of receipt. And recently there is another layer of redevelopment of this territory, which refers to the beginning of 21st century, and mainly it's office territories in this area, and we're not that interested in them because it's mostly business area. So there is a huge stigma for this kind of territories, which were developed in the 50s and 80s in Lithuania. They are called also as sleeping districts, which means that nothing happens there. And it's kind of stereotype and also stigma, because from time to time these places, they are referred as ghettos. And we have recently this idea about these territories that, okay, we need somehow to maybe bring more new buildings there, or what we are going to do with these houses which are getting older and older. So there are a lot of questions which are connected to these territories, and there are a lot of harsh discussions actually about how these areas can be redeveloped. But I would like to stress that there is a huge difference of approaches when we speak about this kind of territories, because this stereotype that nothing happens in these so-called sleep districts, it refers to the idea that these kind of territories, they mostly were monofunctional, only meant for sleeping, for staying. But in fact, we have a quite well-developed social structure there. Kindergartens and schools, also series of shops and some commercial structures as well. So it depended, and also the green yards of these places, as on the picture you see on the screen, they also have a very multi-layered function. From one hand, they are meant for socialization, and from the other hand, there is a huge cultural potential there. So depending on who is looking at these green spaces, we get different impressions. For example, when I cooperate with young architects, they say that nothing happens there and we need to redevelop, radically these places. When I cooperate with biologists, they say, oh, a lot of species live in these green territories, and there are ecological services and goods, and we need to explore who is living there and what kind of plants are there. When we cooperate with sociologists and anthropologists, we get the idea that there are a lot of micro contacts, everyday practices, which takes place here. So that's why it's important to build cross-sectorial and also teams of people coming from different backgrounds. And this project actually provided us the possibility to build these small teams, inviting people from various areas. So actually on the screen now you see this split in the image of the districts, like that it's gray areas where nothing happens, and at the same time it's green areas with some inclusions of trust. For example, you see the photo of the laundry hanging there by the multi-store house. That means that actually people, they trust each other if they put their underwears in their courtyards. And we see that in these spaces, in these places, we have a structure of open green yards. For the projects, we limited ourselves with part of the territory, and here you see the plan, but designed not by architect, but by designer, to make it more understandable for also participants of our workshops, for people who do not used to read the plans. And we tried to map how many places for kids and open spaces for sport and for leisure activities, active leisure activities we have there. And you see the balls there, right? Football balls in these places where some infrastructure for kids was meant to be and was. And you also see the 5 and 9 stores houses. So these are mainly the places we were focusing on. And you also can see that these yards, they connect to each other and they create kind of green passes, green routes. And that's something we started to draw upon. However, when you go through these yards, you see that they are taken little by motorization. And that's one of the harsh challenges for our cities. I also learned through urban cultural planning project that it's also a challenge for our Polish colleagues. They experience similar threats, and even our so-called national religion, which is basketball, is being taken by cars. So cars are a new national religion in this way, but some places are quite nicely renewed. So actually what we also found is that when we started mapping how much cultural infrastructure do we have by these blocks of flats with quite a dense population, we see that there is a lack of open cultural infrastructure and lack of social infrastructure for elderly people. We need to mention that in these kind of areas, the population is older than in a newly built quarters in Vilnius, and this also brings a lot of challenges of how to provide infrastructural services to elderly population, and how also to provide possibilities for interactions between different generations in these places. And most of social contacts, because elderly people do not have places to meet, they do not have some social clubs in this area or some other platforms which would be open for the meetings, main contacts take place in courtyards of these blocks of flats. So at the same time, this system of the courtyard support everyday recreational activities, walking, socializing. However, we found that there is a need for variety of cultural scenarios so that we could attract also youngsters to use these routes more actively, and also kids with parents to use these routes more actively, because it's something which is already in the districts, but it's not that actively used. This network of open green courtyards, they provides two types of services. From one hand, it's social interactions, social services, and also ecosystem services. And it's important for the well-being in these places because it supports physical and psychical health. And also it's a place for everyday creativity. So when we started with cultural planning, we started mapping what kind of creative resources do we have in this area. And of course, the main thing is to see what people are doing in these open spaces, what kind of traces do they leave there. And when you start mapping these kind of activities, I will show you several photos as a part of documentation. We also found that the mapping itself can be a quite interesting task and can be presented as a kind of cultural activities, which can encourage people of various age to search for new objects, some interesting inclusions in their space, share their knowledge with each other about the spaces. So itself, mapping can be an interesting creative task. The question is, what kind of tool do we provide as encouragers, inspirators to the residents to use this idea in a more creative way? So we, as a university, we decided to move in three directions. From one hand, we were interested in providing possibility for our students and also to young professionals to learn about cultural planning and to involve students and young professionals to cultural planning process. And from the other hand, we wanted to also through non-formal educational activities to encourage local kids to become co-designers of the courtyards. From the other hand, we used walking routes and games to promote the green spaces and green links and green routes in the neighborhood. And also we moved to the direction of co-design, the development of one of the yards in which the residents were the most active ones, and they decided to take care of what they are going to develop further. So that was the question actually which was brought by the residents themselves on the very early stage. If something is done in the neighborhood, who is going to take care of that? So those who were the most active and they really were eager to take care of urban furniture. In this case, they won the possibility to have this urban furniture in their yards, and also to be kind of managers of this urban furniture in other courtyards. So I will show you the illustrations and will explain more about each of the directions. So speaking about everyday creativity and talents of the residents which are visible in the courtyards, we have a very wide spectrum in our cities. In every city you go, in any European country, you will see the small traces of everyday creativity. And the task to find these traces, as I told already, it's already a kind of game, urban game. So we find that in our courtyards, in the area we were working with, we have sculptures installed by some anonymous artists back in 80s and 90s. So they are there, but no residents. We couldn't find the name actually of the artist, but he was one of the residents of the area. Then we have very actively developed gardens in the courtyards, mostly by elderly ladies, but they have a lot of know-how of how to grow the gardens by their houses. And also we have all kinds of small sculptures installed by people living nowadays in these areas. So these are kind of potential. These traces show us and prompt us what kind of activities can be developed further. Also speaking about everyday creativity, sometimes you get this traces of obsession of the residents with some idea. For example, one of the elderly residents, he visited in the 90s, he visited Spain, and he was so impressed by Spanish mosaics that when he went back to his house in Schniepeskis, he started, and now it continues for 30 years. He started decorating his house, two stores house among these multi-store houses, decorating this house by self-made mosaics, and it's continued. It's now it's a process like Sagrada Familia, which will never stop, I think. So one of the first activity we started developing in 2020, it's the activity with students. It's walking tours in the neighborhoods, like excursions, and appreciation tours and game. So in the very beginning, we, with the student groups, we were going to the so-called sleeping areas, proposing students to collect the documentation about the areas, to take photos of what they are interested in, and then to share about the impressions about these areas. And later on, some residents also joined, because when they see the group of people going from one yard to another, so inevitably some contacts, small contacts happen. And also we proposed students to make small researches about courtyards in a smaller groups, applying all kinds of ethnographic and social methods, social research methods, like interviews with the locals, taking photo documentation. In the cases they see the possibility to apply focus groups approach, to make media content research, to find how the district is presented in the media, and so on. And it was very interesting for me to work both with Lithuanian groups and Erasmus groups, because Erasmus students, they provide this outside perspective on the district. And then they really start appreciating things which are so common to local students. So bringing international groups together appeared to be very productive, because during these conversations, both groups find something new. And local students start appreciating this kind of these districts more, although they have stigma, but because of this appreciation view of outsider, you suddenly understand that, oh, there is something interesting in this district and I can be proud of it. So things which were found by the students, it's actually these caring spaces which are developed by local residents, for birds and for cats mostly. And people really in our yards, they're fond of creating the small architecture for non-human users. And you can find, I think it's also in your cities, at least bird houses is something which is quite popular in, I think, in our regions. Later on, schools started approaching the university and my organization with the task or the request of arranging the tour and excursion in Šnipiškes, because they already learned that we are doing this for students, and they saw that we're doing it for students. So they wanted also their kids to be involved. And then we understood that we need then the input of experts, and we invited some specialists in arborists and specialists in plants. One of them is Dainius Labeckis, to co-design the game which is focusing on plants in the neighborhood. And by this, we wanted to overcome this so-called plant blindness. I myself living in the similar area. I, see all the greenery, but I do not know that much about it. Sometimes I even do not know the name of the greenery. So we started documenting with invited experts the plants in the area. And we came up with more than 150 cards of plants with short description in several languages, from the other hand. And the idea was then when you get this cards set, it's kind of, and they only devoted to trees, shrubs, and vines, and there could be even more, but we had to stop because it was already too much, and we even didn't know where to get, the box which would be fat enough to contain all the cards. And the idea is that when you get this set of cards, they can be used in very different ways. From one hand, it's, of course, for educational purposes. For schools, for example, when you learn about botanics, biology, you can go out with kids, and you can run the game with them. And also, we announce games among residents, local residents, to come and to test if they can recognize the plants, or if when they have the card with the plants, to find where this plant is. Because some plants are not that, they're more rare, for example, in the area, and you have to run around to find this plant. So it was kind of prototype, but we really see the potential of it, and we ourselves learned a lot of about the plants which are growing in this kind of area. And I think it's quite universal thing for the other areas, although we found out from the experts, but that speaking about the identity of every district, we can find different constellation of the plants. In some districts, you will never find the type of plants you have in other districts. And also what is important, it also can be a link to the history of the districts. For example, in Soviet era, when these blocks of flats were developed, they were built instead of older houses, previous houses, which had gardens, fruit gardens. And now in the courtyards, we have old apple trees and some other fruit trees, and we can recognize that, oh, this is the place where previously this old house could be. And the trees only left, and the architecture is not there. So then you can be interested in the history of the place. So sometimes plant prompts us some interesting stories about the district. So it's one of the small formats we used. And the other format is Urbingo game. We have developed a similar game for as Laimikis team, as NGO, Urban Games and Research Lab. We have developed this game for the traditional part of the district previously. And now, during this second phase, when cooperating with the university and working on the block of flats territory, we developed the second version of this game for the second part of the district. And this game, we also developed it in different cities around Europe by invitation of cultural organizations and municipalities on different occasions. And now we see it as a format which we use in different neighborhoods. The idea is to encourage people to document and to follow the elements, interesting urban elements, which can be the elements of heritage, or they can be taken wider as some interesting everyday elements of everyday urban environment. So this is a thing which already existed before urban cultural planning project, but we adjusted it to the new area, new territory. Also, because during the project we were cooperating with the students, we encouraged students to find the way how to, it was a part of urban studies course, which is taught to students each year. So we have bachelor students, and we tried to involve them also to this project, and we encouraged them to think how to tell the story about the neighborhood through some visible accents in the neighborhood, how to create new roots in the neighborhoods, and how to strengthen the identity of the place. So one of the groups, it's one of the successful examples of how students worked with it. They started making the inclusions, art inclusions in the pavement of the neighborhood, because the idea was that, okay, in these blocks of houses area, you do not see so much interesting elements. So sometimes you need to bring new elements there, which can be small scale. And in this case, the group of students, one of them is from Šilute's city. You see the name of the city on the screen. And in this city, the art teacher of art school in this city, he developed with his pupils this initiative, which is called Šilute's Secrets, the secrets of the city of Šilutė. And his idea was that a big part of histories of the cities, they are not visible anymore, and they are not material anymore. So let's bring these traces of the history in a very small scale. For example, some school of 19th century or some other place of the city in the form of these secrets, as we call it, these small inclusions in tiles. And the students, they contacted this art teacher, and he explained them how to do this inclusion in Šnipiškės. It's still there, although from time to time we see that there is some condensation under the glass pops up, so everything is temporal, but it still remains. And it's also interesting, I think, for many municipalities, it's a question actually how to treat this kind of objects. The students approached our eldership. It's a part of municipality in the neighborhood, and they tried to get the permission, official permission for that, but they got unofficial one, because there is no, bureaucratical, how to say, category of what it is. It's not an art because the students are not professional artists, and it's not commissioned by the city, but at the same time, it's something valuable for the neighborhood. So unofficially, they can do it after the discussions with the eldership. Also, students were encouraged to make interviews, as I mentioned, and because a big part of the population of this neighborhood and this kind of districts are elderly people, they made a lot of intergenerational interactions. And it was quite interesting because it's also sometimes it's quite a question of languages, because the elderly population, sometimes they speak mainly Russian or Polish languages, and students speak, younger generations, they speak Lithuanian, or they can speak English, but not other languages. So it's sets also a lot of questions of how to run this communication. But in the end, students came up with some ideas again how to arrange activities with elderly people. And one of the examples which was set just before the lockdown, because we started the project just on the edge of the lockdown, was the idea of bridging the elderly people of the neighborhood and commercial cultural platform in the commercial cultural club in the neighborhood, who addressed the challenge to the students that they would like to have volunteers in the club. They need free hands. And the students in their turn, they also discussed with the elderly people of what are the forms of leisure time for elderly people. I understood that maybe it's a good idea to combine two things: the free time of elderly residents and also the cultural club, which is commercial. But when elderly people come and help, they get free tickets to the events of the cultural club. So it actually was developed by, this idea was developed by students themselves, and they managed to test this idea. So only one event was made. Only one elderly person came to this event, but they really believe that it's possible to do. That the question is of how widely they spread the information, and if there is support of institutions involved in like social services involved in this process. But it's kind of solution, partly solution for the lack of social infrastructure in the neighborhood. So this was developed by the MA students, master students of creative industries. The other things which we managed to co-develop with the students during the lockdown was to set a number of cultural tours and cultural routes in the neighborhoods. But because of the lockdown, our students remained for 2 years almost in their own towns, and that expanded our geography. So we went away only from our neighborhood. We expanded the task, and whenever students were in whatever city or in some different districts, we discussed the possibility to promote walking routes in different districts for local residents. And it appeared that it was quite a successful turn, because especially in the smaller places, in the smaller towns, municipalities and local communities are very enthusiastic about setting this kind of routes. And they gives a lot of informational support and also material support, bring together local artists and students, and they provide proactive help. While in the bigger cities, sometimes students, they need to, repeatedly go to municipality, and sometimes there is no interest to them. Mostly these routes, they were developed by using very simple materials and tools, what is available for being in in your place, in your hometown. For example, the students, they used colored stones or birdhouses, colored birdhouses, or printed maps and cards or applications. Actually, at that time, 2 years ago, there was a number of free to approach applications for building the routes. Now, some of them closed already, and maybe new popped up, and some become commercial. But 2 years ago and 1 year ago, we were lucky to use these applications for free. So it's something, again, which is pretty much available and sustainable in use. Then if it's young people who want to build some kind of new cultural route in their town, they can still use this material. So for us, it was important that these competences of the students, which are developed during this period of time, that they could develop them further after the studies are over and after the project is over. So there are some some examples of these routes. And another activity was co-developed together with another local hero. So students came up with the idea that the local residents of various age, they're kind of local heroes, each of whom has his or her own competencies. And we found the local artist Pius, who is a graffiti artist, but also his professional young artist who lives in the area. So we understood that it's very important to involve exactly local people to develop in these cultural roots. And we were speaking with Pius about promoting the roots in the neighborhoods. And he came up with the idea that, okay, I'm going to use my, from his perspective, that he's going to use his style in creating plywood cats, because cats is something which is very common to these courtyards, and he will place these cats in different courtyards to promote walking from one cat to another to find these inclusions. But later on he came up with some other personages as well, like here, for example, he says that he depicted the inhabitants of this house, and I was pretty much worried if inhabitants will love these portraits of themselves, but they do. From time to time you see these ladies sitting by their own portraits and so on. So he was playing with this idea, and also we involved two young curators of cultural project in these cultural planning activities. And they were developing together with the residents the ideas of how to revitalize the yards in the neighborhoods. And after a series of workshops, we found that the residents actually value such components of their courtyards as nature, and also possibility to just sit and observe, to have some calm scenario for leisure time. So there are not so many enthusiasts of changing radically the dynamics of the use of courtyards. So people do not want loud parties in their courtyards. They want, to have some, silent, nice connections there. And it was interesting that during the workshops, one of the ladies, she proposed this rethinking about the sleeping district. So she was even proud that she lives in the sleeping district. So she said, so what, we are the sleeping district, our dreams are the best, and we're the best dreamers in the city. So who is living in the sleeping district are the best sleepers, the best dreamers. And also on the base of the ideas of the people who took part in these workshops, which were, the ideas were visualized by peers, by local artists. This young team of curators, they co-designed with the local residents this revitalization of one of the courtyards, building the small green structures there, which primarily are used by kids, but we could also observe how people themselves start rearranging these structures, bringing them one close to another, or adjusting the color of them, for example, coloring them to white. So during this year and a half, these structures changed a lot. So here are some visualizations by the local artist. And the last part of the activities is the involvement of kids to this rethinking and co-design of the neighborhoods, yards. And we cooperated with the Polish artist Iza Rutkowska, who ran the workshop, distant workshop with kids, online workshops with the local kids and kids from other areas, similar to the area we worked with. What animal is that? And she proposed to kids on the base of the plan, which was pre-designed by our architect, to interpret it, the plan of the courtyard, to interpret it as an animal. So, and then she asked kids to explain why this or that animal. So we found quite interesting way of thinking of kids about the space. For example, several kids proposed that they need a giraffe. Why giraffe? Because in the courtyard you have apple trees, and to get the apple you need to climb somewhere. or you need an animal with a long fur because you want to climb holding these parts of fur of the animal, or you want to jump or to get inside the animal. So these ideas about the space is quite interesting, I think, for the architects as well, just to open up the vision of how the playgrounds can be designed. And later we contacted the local theatrical group, Teatronas, Martinas and Gildas is scenographer. And it was for the first time we found how much it's interesting actually for placemakers to cooperate with people coming from the theater, because they looked upon the process of the co-design from the perspective of performance, that it can be a game itself. It's not about co-designing some urban furniture or some animal as an urban furniture, but it's about encouraging kids to hide this urban furniture, to find this urban furniture, to involve parents into this process. And you have a short film about that, how kids were operating this urban furniture in the courtyards. So now these small model urban furniture pieces, they travel across neighborhoods, but one family is responsible for them. So yes, thank you for your attention, and sorry for being too long, and I will be waiting for the questions if there are some. I hope it provided some glimpse of our activities in the courtyards.
Well, my name is Diana, and for now, I guess I've been working as a cultural consultant in the municipality in Guldborgsund in Denmark. So, of course, my chair is very much into the cultural sector and not the planning sector, but when you work in a municipality, it's quite interesting to use the culture in many other areas, such as city planning, but also in educational programs, cooperations with kids and schools, and also the health area is another starting point from the cultural sectoral perspective that we work with at the moment, but I'll get back to that, I suppose. So we started out in a specific neighborhood, I guess it's 4 years ago, in this cultural planning project, working in a neighborhood called Østerbro, and more specific also in some kind of a small former ghetto area called Lindholm, which is quite small actually. It's only, I think it's 1,500 citizens, so it's very, very small. So mostly I've been working with artists and cultural institutions, local cultural institutions, but also in cooperation with school and kindergartens and youth club, etc. But as a beginning, I'll just give you a small introduction to the area. Yeah. The neighborhood, as I just mentioned before, is, yeah, I think it was like a political wish back in time to work more developing and positively in this area. So what has happened from the side of the municipality is developing some different spaces called a forest area and a new urban space, the freedom, which we also connected very much with during the process. Yeah, then it was also decided to merge 2 primary schools in the neighborhood. So I've also been working with cultural and urban places with groups of kids from this new merged school. And of course that also influences a lot in the local neighborhood. Yeah. Just a small picture where you can see it's a quite diverse space. It's in the outside of the city called Nykøbing. So you have, it's not very city-like. It's a little bit quiet. So you have like a lot of villas, and you have the social housings here, and a forest, and a school. And on this specific space, can you see what I point to? Can you see that? Okay, the green area here is a space for a new public space for the whole town. So it still looks like this green empty space. So this implementation phase is quite long-term, and I'll also get back to that because sometimes it is complex to work into a cooperation and a synergy. I don't know the word in English, but when you try to connect city planning with cultural processes. So at the moment, there's nothing implemented, but we have some plans, and we have had like a lot of processes in this specific green area. What I would like to tell is that we have like 10 million Danish kroners. I don't know, is it 1.5 million euros reserved for developing this green space. So we have like a very nice architecture plan with some very good ideas for this space, and it might be implemented within 1 year. But just to put the timeline a little bit clear or unclear actually, is that we've been working within this process for 4 years now, and still it hasn't been realized. So and many times you need some new ways to go and how to connect the culture into this specific urban space. So I hope it's clear. It's late in the afternoon, sorry. Yeah. What we did was to develop tools and methods for future use in this demonstrator project. And I've been working with quite a lot of children and young people and quite a lot of artists as well. So I just give you a short, quick running through all or some of the projects, because we started with a mapping project, and I can tell that in many ways, storytelling has been quite an important focus within this whole project, to get the voice and the different art expressions to be visible for a greater amount of citizens. So we started with a mapping of different places, and we have been working with quite many different artists, having each a different creative or cultural expression or way of expressing stories. And so creating memory stones with the students. This is meaning love in 4 different languages, and it's still hidden in the forest nearby. I think it's almost covered by earth or something. So many of the projects have been quite temporary. You also had the sculptures made in a craft and design project. We had like a cookbook creating food related to the forest, the sea, and also the city, because it's the key elements of this neighborhood. We created some poetry signs, and they were actually seated, or this sign was in the place for a couple of years actually. The rest of them were taken down after some time, but in the meantime, or as a small stop, we had an exhibition with those texts, telling a lot of everyday life stories from the neighborhood, and we had it exhibited in a huge art exhibition, another place in the municipality. So what is to be done next is to find out how to bring back those very finely printed texts to the school and the kids. So it's another thing to be implemented, because we would like to give back the signs for the school, and it's quite difficult because they're quite big. So how to make like a sculpture or an installation with the signs is still to come. So just to put in, some of the implementation challenges. What is actually implemented as some kind of tradition now. It's this project made by an artist called Marika. She worked with the same group of kids every year, so in a 2-week-long project. So sometimes it doesn't have to be like something physical. It can also be those kind of cooperation traditions that really works finely. So in many ways, we use this project as a starting up when kids go from kindergarten to school and having 2 months in starting up the school. So Marika has this project coming up every year, and what will happen is actually that we try to take this project even further to to be implemented as an artwork representing this cooperation and this project. So Marika now has the task to make a visual artwork out of this project to connect somehow the cooperation, but also the interest in nature and the forest, and to put it into some kind of artistic work. So what she's planning to do is to make some huge ceramical balls, yeah, and also some mushrooms, creating this kind of scenario for working with nature and performance in the coming schoolyard. So that's also one way of following a process quite slow. To, if it really works, you can continue and you can develop it further on. So it's one of our ways of implementing things in cooperation, but also in just a few more. This is a picture of the school, and you can see the school is still in a process because it was merged, and the green space that I showed you in the beginning is placed just next to the school, and will also be part of the free space of the school, or the schoolyard, so to speak. So yeah, just to give you some pictures, some drawing exercises which are more quiet, of course, but also still storytelling. They were drawing persons, objects, and spaces, and in many ways you also get some kind of view into the private sphere of the young kids. So to be a little bit more specific in the screen space, you can here see that it's quite empty. And what to put in it, of course, it's architects deciding it, but we also invited some artists to work very concrete into this to this space. So I would like to show you this one. I don't know if you can see me on the picture. I don't know. It was made in 2020. This book, starting up at this empty green space and having kids to also find out how many species do you find in the specific area. So what the kids were doing was to work with the plants of the area in many different ways, and in the end they should choose their own tree to put into this coming urban space. They should also explain why did you choose this specific tree. So for example, you have like a pine tree. Well, it might be this one. And it's because it was chosen by one of the students having a surname meaning pine tree in Turkish. So you have like some different stories from the young kids, and at the moment you have 43 different trees or flowers or bushes that will be put into the city space when it's empty, when it's created. Yeah, sorry. So from what was actually a process in the beginning with various artistic expressions and representations of connections between the kids and the plants and trees, will be a specific part of the cityscape. And within this project, we also created a small meeting with the elderly people, as Jekatarina also mentioned. Sometimes dialogues across generations is quite good to have. So we went to this elderly home with all 43 different species and talking about the history and memories connected from also the perspective of the older people. So now we, for instance, have this story of the young pine tree guy connected with an old man having traditions of pulling up tulips from his own garden, putting them into the basement and replacing them in springtime. So when we put out those different 43 species, it will of course be connected with the stories of the young people, but also the older people. So that's also a way of implementing storytelling and different layers. So yeah. And of course, when you have had all those processes and different projects, you need to ask yourself how to implement. And Jekatarina was also mentioning that. So I could outline that we still continue working with the Here Where We Live project as a headline in various places in the municipality. So instead of only having it as a headline in this specific neighborhood, we also work with the headline in other places of the municipality. My personal wish is to create a whole children and youth festival with the same headline, having kids and young people to tell about the neighborhood and perspectives of their everyday life in similar projects, just to put it short. So what we also continue to do, because sometimes you have projects and then you have new projects. So we actually have this ongoing project for the coming 2 years, 1 year. And then we have some new funding possibilities to continue to work with this cultural method and those cultural partnerships in school and kindergarten. So we have a network of artists, we have a network of teachers, continuing to work with culture, also connected with urban projects. So, for example, just before the summer vacation, we had, I guess, 150 kids working with 6 different artists, choosing a specific place of the coming city space. So, for example, our local historical museum worked with the cooking students, choosing what to put into some plant boxes in the new cityscape when it's realized. We also had 2 artists creating a fence because they should work with biodiversity. So they actually created this fence. I don't think I have any pictures, but it's still visible and existing on the screen spot. So it's some kind of showing the process, keeping the curiosity alive because time span is so damn long, sorry to say, when you start with a new cityscape and it takes like 5-6 years until it's realized. It has been a very long process in this neighborhood. So we try to use art and culture also to visualize and to create visions and to create connections between people, even before the city space is created. That's one of the methods also. And of course, we would like to implement it also in different ways. So that's always something that we look upon. So not only as artworks, but also as corporations and traditions, for example, engaging the kids and the teachers into cooking or into learning about biodiversity in school, etc. Yeah. My keywords to put on is patience, yeah, and also trust, but also really to lean into the process and to play and experiment, because sometimes new perspectives show up, new possibilities show up. And then also to be specific about the storytelling, to focus on that. So I still believe that the headline here, Where We Live, is quite useful. Then you need to know each other and to step into partnerships. That's also a very good way of implementing things, to have traditions, etc. Then of course it's also my job somehow to secure that we can use the experiences in other places of the municipality. We have I'm finished pretty soon, sorry. We have an arts, what is it called? Arts Council in the municipality, working with art and culture. And of course, we'll add in those experiences into the strategy of how can a municipality work with art and city planning. So it's a method that we directly write into different strategies or try to do it, but it's also a method that we try to implement into working groups and other places. So I mentioned other areas like culture and health, sustainability, tourism, etc. But then also in new projects. So implementation is also sometimes new projects, and to getting to know each other within a municipality to find out how can those different perspectives actually meet. So I almost implemented the concept here Where We Live into our local and local cultural factory, and they now continue working with this way of integrating kids in and artists in artist projects, finding out perspectives on the neighborhood. We also created this, in many ways, a little bit crazy project called the Wild Park, which is established just next to the city hall, the town hall. I'll show you pictures. And then we have some huge and expensive art project at a brand new school called Sundskolen. I'll also show you pictures. And just at the moment, we invite an artist to create an active town space in a smaller city. And then, of course, we continue working at Østerbro in different and new projects. So I'll show you some pictures of Vild Park at the town hall. It might not be the pictures that you usually connect with town hall parks, but we kind of got allied with the person responsible for the parks and the green areas in the municipality, and she has the rights to work in this park. And then we got like now it's actually almost 2 years cooperation with two artists called Søren Lose and Thomas Six, and they created different cultural activities in the park with kids and other target groups. So for example, what you see in the middle here might be the beginning of a social sculpture that will be developed out of remnants from older buildings in the municipality, and they will create some kind of space where you can have meetings, where you can seek shelter and so that's also a process. We implement different activities in the park. You see the town hall in the background. And this was an example of having, a festival called Talking Landscapes. And this specific group was actually colleagues from all over the municipality, from different departments. We even took over the town hall, having different objects to speak about the future and biodiversity. And then I'll just in the end show you a huge, amazing artwork at the school that I mentioned before. So this is how you can also implement like bigger artworks, but it will also include that kids and the young people are engaged in developing this artwork. The artistic group is called Studio Thinking Hand, and they work with mushrooms, but also bacteria. No, what is it called? I don't know. But what you see at the ground is various. I'm totally afternoon lost. It's called what you have inside your stomach, inside you. It's what is it called? Andrea.
It's a digestive organ.
It's as a bacteria.
Bacteria.
Yeah, the
bacteria inside you that you can kind of cultivate, and they enlighten up things. Yeah. So it's showing connections between you and the world and what's inside you. Yeah. Sorry. I guess that was it. I hope it was not too confusing. So.